Usato is a good-for-nothing, pathetic loser who desires to live a peaceful life. However, his life changes completely when he gets teleported into another world alongside some folks he just met. In that world, it is revealed that Usato just got dragged alongside the other two for no reason and is pretty much useless. Things take a turn for the good when it is unveiled that Usato actually possesses the rare healing magic. Student Council President Inukami and Kazuki are heading towards the Student Council room, with students wondering if they are dating because their nosiness level is over 9,000. Inukami is eager to modify the school regulations as the ultimate simp Kazuki informs her that the required paperwork has already been prepared. Ken Usato, on the other hand, is a pathetic loser who wants to lead an average school life. His days are dull, but he wishes not to become a worthless NEET unlike you guys. As Usato prepares to return home, he realizes that his umbrella is missing and wonders if someone's broken ass stole it. He then spots another abandoned umbrella, but his conscience prevents him from taking it, so he waits for the rain to end. Even after waiting there for some time, the rain doesn't seem to halt. Suddenly, Inukami appears out of nowhere and questions his presence there, which shocks Usato, because he's a loser who had never talked to a woman before. He's just like me. Anyways, she asks if he doesn't have an umbrella, to which he replies positively. Before she could say anything else, Usato announces that he's heading home, but Inukami stops him, asserting that she can't allow a student to drench in rain. In the meantime, Kazuki also appears at the spot and offers Usato his spare umbrella. This shocks Usato as he wasn't expecting Kazuki to remember his name and deciphers that despite his looks, he is actually a nice guy. After formally introducing each other, Inukami offers to walk together, which further shocks him as the most popular girl of school just offered filth like him to accompany them. As they are walking, Usato comments that he was expecting Kazuki to be a jerk who just likes to play around with women, but he's actually a nice guy. He further questions them if they are dating, to which they reply negatively and assert that he shouldn't believe people blindly, just like I believed in Santa till I was 12. They continue conversing as Inukami eventually asks Usato about his future ambitions, because she doesn't have one herself. This shocks Usato, as she further tells him that she's perfect in everything, and ends up getting bored. She just called Usato a talentless loser in 1,000 different languages. Just then, Inukami and Kazuki start hearing bells ringing, and it keeps getting louder. Usato, however, cannot hear anything and wonders if all that studying has gotten to their heads. Suddenly, a magic circle appears beneath them and teleports them to another world where Kazuki wakes Usato up. Truck-kun will probably lose his job if this continues. Kazuki and Usato are quite concerned about all this, but Inukami seems weirdly excited, which makes Usato realize that she must have hit her brain back in those days. The king then introduces himself as Lloyd Volgest Linger of the Linger Kingdom and reveals that they have summoned them as heroes from another world. He further tells him that they want them to defeat the Demon Lord. Hearing this, Kazuki gets infuriated as he doesn't give a shit about them and asks them to return back home. The king, however, tells him that it is not possible because they can only summon people but not return them. This further infuriates Kazuki, and he attempts to argue, but the knights point their spears towards them. This shocks Inukami, who was literally bursting herself till this point. Just then, the king approaches them and literally begs them to help their sorry ass because his knights are way too worthless. Inukami then questions the reason for summoning them as the king's assistant. Welsi informs them that they were searching for people with potential for becoming the hero and that they must have heard some bells ringing before getting teleported here. This makes Usato realize that he was just dragged into all this and is as useful as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. I'm glad he didn't get the Naofumi treatment. After this, they are taken to a room where their magic aptitude is tested, and it is revealed that Inukami has aptitude for thunder magic, while Kazuki has aptitude for light magic. They even ask Usato to place his hand on the magic ball to check his aptitude even though he's a worthless loser. For Usato, his ball turns green, which scares the living shit out of Welsi, and she immediately informs the king, who pisses himself after hearing this. The king instructs to take Usato as far away from the castle as possible, which makes Usato wonder if he's done something wrong. Just then, a woman enters the hall and questions the king regarding the ceremony. The king, who is scared for his life, informs her about the ceremony and addresses her as Rose. Seeing Usato, she asks if he's the hero, to which he replies negatively. She then introduces herself as Captain Rose of the rescue squad. Welsi then offers to take Rose to the heroes, while the king asks Usato to relax in his room. Usato, however, questions the king about his magic attribute and mentions the word green, which piques Rose's interest, and she decides to take Usato with her. Welsi tries her best to save him, but Rose eventually captures him and takes him along. Welsi then informs Inukami and Kazuki that Usato's magic is healing, which is quite rare, and Captain Rose is also a healer. She plans to take Usato as her subordinate. Later on, Rose informs Usato about his aptitude and that he'll be living alongside them from now on. She also introduces him to the members of Healing Squad, who look like literal thugs, which makes Usato wonder if they are going to sacrifice him. Rose further tells him about 2 other healers that are stationed in the capital and that his training will begin tomorrow. Usato wakes up the following day, hoping that all of this is a dream, but much to his disappointment, this is as real as finding out that your crush only sees you as a friend. As he is thinking about all this, his comrade informs him that he has some visitors, and it turns out that Kazuki and Inukami have come to see if he's alive. During their conversation, Kazuki announces that he has decided to save this world, and for that, he will do his best. With this, both of them leave Usato alone in this hell. Rose, who probably identifies as a freaking gorilla, appears at the spot and hands him a diary to record his training. Following this, his training begins, and Usato notices that this hellish training is not that tough, as Rose just teaches him to concentrate his magic and project it out of his body. She then hands over a book that will guide him about everything in this world, as Usato tells her that he cannot possibly read a new language like that. However, much to his surprise, he can actually read and understand everything, as Rose tells him that the ones summoned by the hero ceremony have an auto-translation cast on them. She then educates him about the kingdom's neighboring countries, which makes him realize that they are basically the demon's first target. Usato continues reading the book because he's locked in, unlike you losers who need a deadline to finish stuff. On day 2, Usato is forced to run a lot, which he deems weird because he's supposed to be training for magic. He continues running on day 3 as well and gets his ass whooped by Rose even if he stops for a moment. Well, she heals him as well, so he can continue running, and the hellish training continues. On day 4, Usato gets the opportunity to train with other squad members, and it pisses him off seeing all of them surpass him easily. Usato keeps running on day 5 and 6 as well. However, on day 6, he notices a green light coming out of his hand, but doesn't think much about it. The following day, he gets his ass whooped by Rose once again, who warns him to not hate her, because that would make the training even worse. This makes him wonder if she has been reading his diary. At this point, Usato's ass has gotten used to getting whooped by Rose, and he might as well call himself Nickel Nethers or something. On day 9, as Usato touches his ass in sheer pain, his hands start glowing, and he heals himself. From that point onward, Usato can now run without exhausting himself because he has learned to output his healing magic. After all this running, Rose has now added push-ups to Usato's training regime, and he's supposed to do 1,000 of them. As Usato is doing push-ups, Rose tells him the reason behind all this physical training. She tells him that he's supposed to save his comrades from dying, and the faster he runs, the faster he'll be able to save them. This makes Usato realize the importance of all this training. From that point onward, Usato's training consists of running all morning and doing push-ups till evening since he is training to become first ever natural Mr. Olympia. Seeing that these tasks have gotten harder for Usato, Rose ties some weights to his body. After all this, as Usato heads back to the base, he asks his comrades about his lunch that had disappeared out of nowhere. Hearing this, one of them admits that he ate his lunch and pretends that he didn't know it belonged to him. This pisses him off, and Usato starts chasing him around like a wild boar. After some days, Inukami and Kazuki visit Usato during his training. They see him performing push-ups with a huge boulder and Rose on his back. He attempts to gaslight Rose by saying that she is way too light, but she pulls an Uno reverse and places another boulder on him. Despite all this weight, Usato manages to complete the push-up, which pleases Rose. This shocks Kazuki, while Inukami starts simping over his insane muscles. Meanwhile, the knight who is accompanying Kazuki and Inukami gets infuriated and starts a beef with Rose. He must be some big shot for grabbing Rose's collar like that, or maybe he wants to get isekai'd. Usato fails to comprehend what is happening as Rose allows him to take a break. Kazuki and Inukami also accompany him, and they settle down beside a riverbank. It is revealed that the knight is actually the commander general of Linger's army, and the girl accompanying them is the princess. As they are talking about their training, Inukami decides to take a peek at Usato's muscles and grabs his shirt. "She is down bad for our boy!" Kazuki then asks if he is having a tough time, to which he replies positively. Usato further tells him that he wanted to run away in the beginning, but he doesn't feel the same now, and he just wants to help them in any way possible. After all this, the comrade who had eaten Usato's lunch before brings him another lunch, and they both start fighting like kids. Kazuki and Inukami, on the other hand, decide to leave for the castle and continue their training. Later that night, Usato also notices that his body has changed a lot and realizes that all that training was worth it. The following morning, Rose hands over a massive bag to Usato and informs him that they are heading outside today. She then takes him outside the capital as they eventually reach a forest named the Darkness of Linger that is filled with deadly monsters. She further informs him that he is not allowed to come back until he kills a grand grizzly. Hearing this, Usato literally pisses himself and attempts to argue, but Rose grabs him and throws him into the forest. After Rose yeets Usato into the air, he literally pisses himself, wondering if he will die. Despite this, he is determined to survive and uses healing magic to cushion his landing. Now that he has landed safely, he has to kill a grand grizzly if he wants to go back. Even though the odds are against him, Usato gaslights himself into believing that he can actually defeat the grizzly. He is even more delusional than a flat earther with a freaking telescope. Just as he is thinking about all this, a grand grizzly appears behind him, which scares the shit out of him, and he starts running for his life. He notices that the grand grizzly is far more bigger than he had assumed, but he is confident that he can outrun it. Boasting that a mere grizzly cannot catch up to him, he realizes that the bear is just behind him. He then thinks to himself that he endured Rose's hellish training, and this grizzly is nothing compared to that. As he is about to take on the grizzly, two more bears appear out of nowhere and gang up on Usato. With no other option left, he jumps into the river. He eventually makes his way to the surface where he dries his clothes and calculates his resources. At this point, he doesn't even have anything to start a fire and has to survive like this. He decides to procrastinate and leave everything to tomorrow, just like I'm doing with my pending assignments. The following day, Usato ventures to locate the Grand Grizzly's hideout to figure out a way to defeat the beast. On his way, he comes across an injured rabbit and heals it. With this, the rabbit decides to accompany him and follows him around like a pesky stalker, which is definitely not me. Usato attempts to get rid of the rabbit, but he keeps following him around as he eventually realizes that the rabbit must know something about the Grand Grizzly's hideout. The rabbit takes him to the grizzly's den, where it is resting alongside his family. It seems like the rabbit has taken a liking to Usato, and he decides to let it accompany him. Usato keeps spying on the grizzlies and even deems them cute. He also realizes that he is actually enjoying all this. Later that night, he got an insane stomachache because he drank water from a river that is even sketchier than my neighbor, whom I haven't seen in months. He attempts to heal himself, but all in vain. The following day, the rabbit takes him to a place with clean water, which makes him insanely happy. As he is drinking water, the rabbit gets scared and climbs a tree as Usato follows him. He notices that there's a massive snake lurking in the forest, even though it wasn't mentioned anywhere in the book. He decides to keep a distance from the snake and keeps observing the grizzly. Even though he has taken a liking to the grizzly family, he has to kill them because he cannot go home without this. At this point, he resolves to kill the grizzly. The following day, as Usato is about to head out, the rabbit attempts to stop him, and he agrees. Later on, as the rain stops, Usato heads to the grizzly's den to hunt the bear. Just as he reaches there, he finds that Mama Grizzly and Papa Grizzly are both dead. He realizes that the massive snake must have been behind this, and that it killed them for fun. Just then, the baby grizzly appears from the rubble and attempts to wake up its parents. This infuriates Usato to the point that he resolves to kill the snake. He prepares himself and asks the rabbit to take him to the snake as it leads him to the snake's hideout. Just as he reaches there, he notices that the baby grizzly is fighting the snake alone. Even though Usato is himself, he knows that nothing is scarier than Rose and ambushes the snake. Seizing the opportunity, he pierces the snake's eye but gets smashed into a tree. Usato knows that he is cooked, but he is still confident in his abilities, unlike you guys who are always doubting yourself. Now, this is the type of motivation we all want. As Usato is about to strike the snake, it bites his arm as Usato shouts in pain. However, much to the snake's surprise, Usato had lured it into biting him so he can pierce his mouth with the knife. Usato believes that he now has the upper hand, but just then, the snake's poison starts acting and he gradually loses consciousness. Usato, however, has learned how to cure poison and heals himself to ambush the snake again. This time around, Usato manages to take down the snake with the baby grizzly's help. With this, Usato lies on the ground with the baby grizzly licking his cheeks. He believes that everything is over, but suddenly, the snake wakes up and ambushes him once again. Damn, this snake is even more persistent than my yandere ex. Just then, Rose appears out of nowhere and beats the living shit out of that snake. This makes Usato wonder how she knew about this as she reveals that the rabbit was actually her spy. She further tells him that she was waiting at the edge of the forest in case something happens, but she wasn't expecting this snake to pop out. She also tells him that she wasn't expecting him to win, but he made things quite interesting. With this, she allows baby grizzly to accompany them, and they head back. Outside the forest, Rose tells Usato that he has earned the right to stand beside her on the battlefield. She also reveals that the demon army will make its move soon enough. Meanwhile, the demon lord is inquiring with the 3rd Division commander, Amila Vergate, regarding the preparations for the invasion as she tells him that the army is ready anytime. Usato, on the other hand, wonders if he can fight alongside Rose on the front lines since he's a pathetic loser. In the meantime, the Demon Lord leaves Amila in charge of the troops, even though he knows she will fail since she's a woman. As she is heading outside, she gets confronted by a guy who taunts her for being nervous, despite being a commander. This pisses her off, and she tells him to mind his own business instead of teasing her. With this, she leaves him behind, but the guy keeps following him and boasts about his modified beasts and even offers to show her. He then takes her to his laboratory, where he introduces his masterpiece as Prototype 72, Baljanak. Hearing this, Amila points out that it has the same name as the previous prototype that got cooked by General Siglis in the previous battle. I guess Baljanak pulled an Anos Voldegode here and named himself. Amila comments that there's an even bigger threat in Linger Kingdom than Siglis, and that are the kidnappers. These kidnappers carry the wounded to the rear and get them healed. Furthermore, their leader is a woman named Rose who wanders around the front lines and heals soldiers at the spot. Amila then vows to kill Rose herself. Hearing this, the doctor reminds her that she cannot fight on the front lines since she's the commander. Amila tells him that she knows this and will leave everything to their trump card. In the meantime, Usato is finally back home, where he was missing Tong's snores. After waking up, he heads outside to feed the baby grizzly some fruits. As they are eating, the rabbit also appears at the spot, but Usato refuses to share the food because he hasn't forgiven it for betraying him. However, seeing its cuteness, he couldn't help but forgive him. Usato then addresses the baby grizzly as Blurin, and as he is feeding him more fruits, Rose appears at the spot and mocks his naming sense. She then informs Usato that she has informed King Lloyd about Blurin, and it can stay with them. But being a communist, Rose believes that Blurin should work as well. She then instructs Usato to carry Blurin and run. He deems this training quite easy, but on his way, the other rescue squad members hinder his way. He somehow manages to dodge all of them and eventually gets exhausted. He wonders why he got exhausted this early. As he is resting a bit, Rose appears at the spot and tells him that the human body gets fatigued from fear, anxiety, and frustration as well. She then advises him to get used to such circumstances and heals him so he can continue running. She also instructs him to run around the town while carrying Blurin. In the town, the people get shocked to see someone carrying a blue grizzly, but they calm down soon enough, which surprises Usato. Just then, Blurin starts feeling hungry and Usato takes him to a fruit shop where a lady offers him fruit. He questions the lady about the peculiar behavior of people, even though he is carrying a literal monster on his back. The lady tells him that the people are used to members of Rescue Squad running around the town. After this, Usato leaves for the castle to meet Kazuki and Inukami. On his way, a guy recognizes him and starts running behind him to call him. Usato, however, ignores him, just like you guys are ignoring that subscribe button. He ends up collapsing on the ground, and Usato has to heal him. As Usato is healing him, the guy introduces himself as Orga Fleur of the Rescue Squad. He is one of the healers stationed in the capital. He further tells him that he and his sister were unable to keep up with Rose's training. He further tells him that he cannot heal himself and has to rely on the others. Usato then questions his role on the battlefield, as Orga tells him that Tong and the others bring the injured to the rear where they heal them. He then asks if he'll be able to keep up with Rose on the front lines, as Orga tells him that the ones in uttermost danger are the heroes and the knights, and with healers on the front lines, they can be saved even if they are gravely wounded. After all this conversation, Usato leaves for the castle while Orga gets confronted by his sister, who scolds him for wandering off alone. Later on, Usato eventually reaches the castle, where he meets Inukami, who is shocked to see Blurin and wants to touch it. Blurin, however, is not good with women just like me and brushes her off. After this, Usato notices the calluses on Inukami's hand and heals them. Seeing this, Inukami asks if Usato is here to see her, but much to her disappointment, Usato mentions Kazuki as well. She tells him that Kazuki is on a training journey with Siglis and the others to get some battle experience. She further tells him that it will be her turn when Kazuki returns. The conversation continues for a while, and Usato eventually decides to leave alongside Blurin. On his way back, he realizes that Kazuki and Inukami are doing their best, and he has to do something as well. In the previous world, he was someone who could only wish for things, but this time, things are different. Later that night, Usato confronts Rose and tells her that he will not fight because he is a pussy. Instead, he will save Kazuki, Inukami, and the others. This makes Rose insanely happy, and she tells him that this is enough. All he has to do is to save those on the verge of death. The following morning, Rose informs Usato that he has been summoned by the king to accompany Inukami on her training. Watch this next video.